thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Histories Uncharted. My name is Shanna, your host, and I have with me today my amazing co-host, Cecilia.
Woo woo! Hi, everybody.
And welcome back to the second part of our two-part series of awesome and exciting fun executions throughout the ages.
Absolutely. And I hope you all did make it back, because I can't wait to get started. What do you have for us, Shanna?
I have lots and lots of fun stuff. As we all know, or those of you that didn't listen to part one, we went through the first part of the alphabet with fun methods of execution, and we are going to continue on today's episode with the rest of the alphabet, and we're just going to learn about the interesting ways that we have tormented each other through the ages. So if we're ready, buckle in and here we go. Dismemberment. This one I have broken into lots of different fun subsections. So dismemberment is the act of completely disconnecting and or removing the limbs from a living person. All right, so we're going to start with, I'm sorry, Cecilia, cutting with elephants. So in Delhi, in the 1330s, this is a witness's account. Upon a certain day, when I myself was present, some men were brought out who had been accused of having attempted the life of the vizier. They were ordered to be thrown to the elephants, which had been taught to cut their victims to pieces. Their hooves were cased with sharp iron instruments, and the extremities of these were like knives. On such occasions, the elephant driver rode upon them, and then the man was thrown to the ground. They would wrap the trunk about him, toss him up, and then throw him down in between his feet. And then they would proceed to cut him to pieces with their feet. When they were done, the skin would be taken off and stuffed with hay, and the flesh was given to the dogs.
That's just so rough. I mean, it sounds like the elephants are just playing with them. Like they don't understand the horror of what is happening.
I bet they don't appreciate how messy it gets all of a sudden.
I don't know. I've seen elephants play with like big pumpkins, like at the Portland
Oh
Zoo.
yeah, they do.
You know, and the smashing of pumpkins. I imagine a human body is very similar. I can't imagine like these giant like spikes off of their feet. Oh man. And then they, I'm sorry, take the skin and stuff it with straw.
Yep. So
and then feed the meat to the dogs.
Yeah. Well, they got to get something out of it too. The dogs.
That's just rough. I mean, at least there's no cannibalism involved. I mean, like, that would just be an extra layer that, yeah. That's rough, man.
We always have the good old-fashioned dismemberment with knives. All right, so we're going to go back to the Holy Roman Empire. Big fun. This dude was found guilty of 52 separate acts of murder, including the rape and murder of 8 women, the murder of a child whose heart he had allegedly eaten for rituals of black magic.
Wow.
So to begin with, this man had 3 strips of flesh torn from his back before being pinched 18 times with glowing pincers. He then had his fingers clipped off one by one, his arms and his legs broken on the wheel, and then finally, while still alive, he was quartered.
And the glowing pincers were like glowing hot from the fire.
Right. So you grab and then you pull, and you grab and you pull.
Ooh.
Yeah. Here's a fun one. Dismemberment by tree.
What?
Oh,
What?
oh, those Romans.
Okay. They really enjoyed dismemberment in a variety of ways.
They did. Okay, so we're going to go back to the 3rd century. So Roman soldiers that were guilty of having affairs with other men's wives were to be dismembered by tree branches. The condemned man would be tied upside down by their feet to 2 young tree branches which had been forced downwards and bound together, creating incredible tension. When the trees were cut, the unfortunate fellow would be torn in half.
What?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a slingshot that's meant to rip you open, and you're the slingshot until you're split open.
So an example of this in 365, this dude named Procopius, he declared himself emperor and he moved against the emperor Valens. He was defeated because his 2 generals turned him in. It was terrible. So he was captured and he was fastened to 2 trees bent down with force. When the trees were released, Procopius was ripped apart.
So like the first guy that was like, I want to try that. I want to see what happens if we do that.
What do you think would happen if we just tied Bob over there to those trees?
Is that going to be strong enough? Do I need to find stronger ones?
I don't know. Let's get a thicker sapling for this one.
Could you imagine the countryside hunt for the perfect set of trees?
They've got to be next to each other. Exactly.
Like,
I love how our logistical brains are like, wait a second.
like
What are the tree requirements for this?
How did this come about, you know? All right, well.
Dismemberment by horses. This is also referred to as disruption. Dismemberment could be brought about by chaining 4 horses to the condemned arms and legs and then pulling them apart. All right, 1610, Francois. Nope, not trying that one. Francois. He was condemned to be tortured with red-hot pincers on 4 limbs and on each breast. His wounds were to be sprinkled with molten lead and boiling oil, and his body was then to be torn in pieces by 4 horses, the remains being subsequently burned.
I just don't like it when animals are involved, I guess. It just seems so uncool.
I agree. They're involved in our lives a lot, though.
Right.
We live closely with animals throughout history.
And it's not like this is something that's slow that happens for that person, you know? The noise, the experience, it's a lot like stretching, except for you're being heckin' quartered. Like, ugh.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
The sound of the pop and rip is...
You know, it's funny. Speaking of that pop and rip. So in France, 1620, this dude Michael, his agony went on for hours as each torture was applied. The horses failed to disconnect the sinews between his body and his limbs. His body, still alive, was then quartered with a knife slowly. His friend, the infamous Casanova, reports that he had to watch the dreadful sight for 4 hours. I was obliged to turn my face away and stop my ears as I heard his piercing shrieks, half his body having been torn from him.
What an account. That's his bud out there experiencing this. Holy cowbells. Like, yeah. I don't know. Like, the experience of it, but the generational heckin' trauma of, like you said, just being desensitized to violence happening to real life people in front of you every day was just so
right.
common.
Our violence is desensitizing, but it's happened on digital creatures, you know, characters that don't exist, or in movies with effects and makeup and stuff. These poor people were listening to the death shrieks of their neighbors.
And having to stay silent and quiet so
Yes.
that it wasn't brought upon them.
And honestly, most of the time, it was also obligatory to attend these executions. Like, they were announced ahead of time. Everyone had to go. You had to witness, and you had to make sure you followed the rules.
Right.
Yeah. Poor Queen Brunhilde. She was in Francia, so this is 613. The king ordered that she be lifted onto a camel and led through the entire army. Then she was tied to the feet of wild horses and torn apart limb from limb until finally she died.
Sounds like a terrible way to go.
This one's kind of weird. I just threw it in there. It's by Stone. It's really the only reference I found to it, but I just had to throw it in there. So he's this really obscure Christian martyr. His name is Severinus. I thought that was fun for you. Her dog's name is Severus.
Yeah.
So this is around the year 300. One stone was fastened to his head, another bound to his feet. His middle was then fastened to a rope on the top of a wall, and then the stones were released and his body was ripped in half.
That's messed up. But clever. But messed up.
And I think that concludes dismemberment for you.
I'm grateful. I'm grateful we're ready to move on.
To a very fun aspect called hanged, drawn, and quartered, which is kind of another form of dismemberment, but supersized. It's like the deluxe version of dismemberment. So this is used mainly in England, and it is considered one of the most brutal forms of execution ever devised. First, the victim is tied to a wooden frame. Then they are hung until nearly dead. Immediately after they're being taken down, their abdomen is opened and their entrails are removed. The victim watches as their entrails are burned before their eyes. He is then emasculated, beheaded, and quartered.
That is a whole heckin' process that they are going through and experiencing. Nice. It's like signing up for the luxury spa package of death.
The luxury. It is. As we keep saying, that these things are public crime deterrents. What was often happened after this is once his body was divided into 4 parts, those 4 parts were then placed in various locations around the city, around the country, wherever you wanted to put, to show people that this had happened. This punishment was only used on men. Any woman that was convicted of any of these crimes, they were generally burned at the stake as a matter of decency. This was abolished in 1867.
Only.
That's pretty recent if you think about it.
Yeah, only.
One of the most famous examples that most people would be familiar with is William Wallace. 1305. He was stripped naked and dragged through the city at the heels of a horse. He was strangled by hanging, but released while he was still alive. Emasculated, eviscerated, his bowels burned in front of him, beheaded, and then cut into 4 parts. His head was dipped in tar and placed on a spike atop London Bridge. His head was later joined by the heads of his brother John and his compatriots.
Yeah.
And his limbs were displayed separately in Newcastle, Berwick, Stirling, and Perth.
Wow.
As a reminder that you don't fuck around and find out.
For real, man. What a story of a man.
Yeah. Another super famous one that most people might have heard of is Guy Fawkes. 1605, almost 300 years to the day. That's so fun. To the year, at least. Let's see. He was condemned to be drawn backwards by a horse, his head near the ground. He was then to be put to death halfway between heaven as earth, as unworthy of either. His genitals would be cut off and burned before his eyes, and his bowels and heart removed, then decapitated and dismembered, with his body parts displayed, so they might become prey for the fowls of the air. However, weakened by days of torture, Fawkes was able to climb the ladder to the noose, but he jumped off of the scaffold and hung and broke his neck at the beginning of the execution, so he didn't have to be hung and eviscerated and then beheaded. He died right there on the scaffolding. So that was a good break for him. Get it? Break.
Oh, jeez. Oh, it's terrible. I didn't know about Guy Fawkes or William Wallace being emasculated. I didn't know that. That wasn't
Guy Fawkes
part of this
wasn't.
Cinematics.
Guy Fawkes wasn't. He didn't make it that far. So you get strangled first, then you have your bowels cut out.
So you're explaining this is the process he was going to go through.
He was going to go through.
He thwarted them all.
He thwarted them at the scaffold by jumping or falling. Some say he was so weakened from torture that maybe he collapsed and fell, and then it snapped his neck, or he jumped and it broke his neck.
I'm going to go with the heroic Guy Fawkes.
Ending it, yeah.
Guido.
Ending
it all.
I'm sure that Hollywood wouldn't have wanted to put an emasculation, but it did happen to William Wallace. That was...
That's insane.
Yeah.
Makes me feel big feelings about that.
And then they get to watch it burn before their eyes. I think that's rough. Do you know what haunts me? What if it smelled good?
Yeah.
What if you were starving because you've been in jail for a month and you haven't eaten anything, and then all of a sudden there's this barbecue next to you? What if it smelled?
I am convinced that once the smell of burning hair is gone, that we do smell quite delicious. I'm convinced that we do. I would not eat another human. I don't think that I would. I would let myself starve.
I'm just going to throw it out there. I would. I'll hopefully wait till you're dead. But I would also ensure that your children ate you to keep them alive.
I would appreciate that.
I told my husband every day. I mean, well, whenever it comes up, which ironically for us, it comes up a lot. I said, when I die, you feed me to her and you make sure she lives. That's your job.
Yeah.
He does not appreciate that. But these are the conversations that I have as Pillow Talk.
It's deep thoughts.
All right. Oldie but a goodie. The head crusher.
Listen. I'm here for this.
So this was really popular in the Spanish Inquisition, which, spoiler alert, we're just going to go ahead and do a whole episode on that because it was so fun. Okay, so this is where the person's chin is placed over the bottom bar and the head under a metal cap. The executioner slowly turns the screw, gradually compressing the head between the bar and the cap. At first, the teeth were smashed and disintegrated into the jaw. Then the eyes followed. Some variants of the head crusher even included a small container that received the eyeballs that were squeezed out of the person's eye sockets. This agony could last several hours until the victim's brain was finally crushed to mush.
What a way to go.
Yeah.
I just think that's insane. Crushing of the head, just the experience of that pain, I don't know, as a migraine sufferer.
It hits you in a different way, yeah.
Incapacitating it would be, that pain.
Yeah.
That's insane.
As your eyeballs are being popped out of your head.
For
when
real.
Your teeth are smushing into your jaw.
The most intense pressure on your brain, your face, your head. Ugh.
This horrendous instrument was an effective way to extract confessions from the victims, as the suffering could be prolonged to an indefinite time. However, if the torture was stopped midway, the person, although still alive, often had irreversibly damaged brain, jaws, or eyes.
No way. How strange.
Just for fun, medieval India and Persia trained elephants to crush the heads of their criminals.
That is messed up.
As we had said.
There's my elephants again.
Yeah. I think we might be getting to the end of elephants, hopefully. I don't think they pop back up again, but if they do, I apologize.
Yeah.
This might be familiar to any Histories Uncharted listeners. We're going to bring in impalement.
Woo woo.
And really, I just took it straight from the other description because I feel like it was just so good. First, a stake was made, not too sharp so the death is slow, and the person did not die of shock. Then they had their legs tied to a horse while the stake was slowly forced into the person's body. Normally, the stake was inserted through the anus and forced through the body until it came out the mouth. But there were several instances when they were pierced through other organs. Sometimes they were left hanging upside down as they died slowly. That's a fun one.
It is a fun one. I've got to tell you, I am stuck on recalling the ocean of,
Yeah.
or the lined walk
Yeah.
to Vlad's castle that they experienced, and all
those
the
poor
men and
Turkish
people.
soldiers seeing thousands and thousands of men writhing on these field of stakes.
It's insane.
I just can't get over how bad it would smell.
Oh God.
The blood, the excrement, the smoke, the wood, the screams, the vomit, bile. I mean, God.
It's everything.
It's everything.
I can't even imagine. And then, the
Sounds.
Ugh.
This one's fun. Death by molten metal. First, the guilty individual would be strangled with a rope by two witnesses. It must be a soft rope to ensure no additional suffering from coarse material. When the strangulation caused the condemned to gasp for air, molten lead was then poured down his throat. An example of this is from Game of Thrones, where they poured it over his head, the gold over his head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He well-deserved death. I don't know. I just find it so interesting that they are so intentional about the type of rope used on their neck.
Soft. Supple.
Nice and soft and supple and gentle.
We don't want to hurt or offend during this process.
Until it's time to hurt and offend you.
Yeah. So the Roman Emperor Valerian the Elder, he was captured by the Persian king, and after a long, humiliating imprisonment, he was executed by forcing him to swallow molten gold. Then he was flayed, his skin was stuffed with straw, and preserved as a trophy in the main Persian temple.
Could you imagine what it looks like to take the metal out of them after it's solidified? I've just seen a lot of videos about people putting molten metals into like anthills.
That is the image that just popped into my head. I was like, people are doing this. They pour stuff into anthills, they dig it out, and you can see all the different branches and tributaries that the ants had dug their home into. And I feel like it would be very similar to that you would rip the flesh away from the metal and it would be hardened into the shape of an esophagus.
Very curious about that. That would be weird. I wonder if it would make its way down to your stomach, or if it would just like eat through, and it would just be an expansion of what it could eat through before it hypercooled.
Yeah, that's true, because it would certainly melt the very soft tissues of the esophagus going down and then spread out. Yeah. Are you laying? Are you sitting? What is the gravitational pull of this liquid? Like, there's a lot of dynamics to this. Wow.
It's wild. Death by molten metal.
Yeah. Sorry to do this. Here come the animals again.
Oh.
Death by rat. This is one of the most controversial and brutal forms of torture ever. The victim was tied to the ground, their feet bound together, and their hands tied to a post. Usually, the torturer would place a metal box full of rats on the victim's stomach or face. The rats would slowly eat them over time. Sometimes the metal box would be heated. The rats, desperate to escape, would burrow through the victim's stomach. Sometimes this would be done with more than one rat. With each new rat that entered the container, they would gnaw the victim's flesh even more. In many cases, the victim would bleed to death from the wounds inflicted by both the animals and his own frantic attempts to free himself.
Oh my gosh. I imagine like the box is also hot for that human.
Oh, right, right.
That they are cooking and blistering, which is then just creating more surface area for the rats to then feast right on into.
And it's generally over the stomach, so this has no bone, so it's all very soft, and it's this huge cavity for the rats to just go into very easily.
And it's a lot like most gut wounds. I don't know. I'm a Tarantino fan, and that's where I learned that you shoot them in the belly because
Slow.
It's nice and slow.
Yeah.
They have hours, potentially. All that jazz.
Some of it was a face, which was very common, and the rat would just eat your lips and your nose and your eyes, and you would just sit there and, you know, have your face slowly eaten.
That sounds miserable.
Yeah. I hope he doesn't get cold and wants to try to go in the warm hole.
I'm sure he does.
Who doesn't want to go in a warm hole? Duh.
Oh, I'm sure that rat does.
This one's so fun, and I love the name, The Republican Marriage.
Do tell.
Okay, so this is a method of execution that occurred during the Reign of Terror in Revolutionary France.
Okay.
This involved tying a naked man and a naked woman together and then throwing them into the river, drowning them.
Together?
Yeah. Again, you're being naked, you're paraded in front of people, it's humiliating, it's painful, you're tied to someone else, and then you're thrown into a river.
But, like, why?
As to die.
Just to die for the sake of, we're gonna make you die?
Yeah. Not everyone can get the guillotine.
I guess. That's messed up.
Which is super funny because I didn't even include the guillotine in this form of executions. If you haven't noticed, as we're R the way to R, and there was no guillotine.
There is no guillotine.
But as you can tell, listeners, there are so many different fun ways to kill people that I barely scratched the surface.
The guillotine is a popular one as well.
It is. It is. This is another popular one, at least in ancient times, and this is called the saw.
Listen, I've got some problems with this. But carry on. Let's explain the saw.
This is a popular form of execution since the Roman times. Basically, you saw the victim in half, but whether it is through the abdomen widthwise or down the middle of the body lengthwise was the determining factor. Most victims were hung upside down and then sawed through in half lengthwise, starting in their groin and ending with their head to extend out the pain and the suffering. They would most likely be conscious most of the time.
Yeah. Imagine being the two dudes carrying the bandsaw, like making this happen. In the image is quite fun. I'm fairly certain one of the dudes is smiling.
Well, you know, executioners got paid really well.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
To carry the sins and the burdens. I could imagine that they're, you know, depending upon their religion and stuff, there wasn't much hope for that person. So they probably were paid well.
All right. We're just going to try this. Perisatis. She was the wife and half-sister of Darius II, who was the Persian king around 405. So supposedly she was the real power behind the throne, and she often became involved in court intrigues, but had the uncanny knack of dispatching them at an opportune time. One point, she decided to have the siblings of her daughter-in-law killed. She didn't kill her daughter-in-law only because her son desperately begged her not to.
Okay.
But in front of daughter-in-law and son, she executed the sister Roxana by being sawn in half. Sawn? Yes, that's a word. You say it too many times and it loses all meaning. Sawed? Sawn?
Sawn sounds
weird.
It does. But we're going with it, guys.
Sawed. I like sawed. And now that sounds weird too.
She sounds like a terrible person.
Hey, you gotta do what you gotta do to keep the throne.
I guess.
All right, the 21st king of Persia, Hormizd IV. He was deeply resented by the nobility due to his cruelties. In 590, a palace coup was staged in which his own son was declared king. Hormizd was forced to watch his wife and one of his sons sawed in two, and then the deposed king was blinded. After a few days, the new king is said to have killed his father in a fit of rage.
I'd be angry too.
Yeah.
That's really messed up. I don't know, just sawing people in half. It just seems comical.
I don't think they found it very comical.
I'm sure not the actual, like, going through that. It just, I don't know, it just seems ridiculous to me. The thought process of sawing somebody in half.
Well, the Thracian king Zisselmius, whoa, that one's fun, around 145 BCE, he loved to saw people in half, and then he commanded their families to eat the flesh of their murdered relatives. The Thracians eventually rebelled, captured him, and inflicted every torture he did to others onto him.
That seems very Vlad-like.
Yeah. So we're definitely going to have an episode with this guy because he's just an inspiration to many.
Okay.
This is the Roman Emperor Caligula.
Oh, yeah.
He's fun. Yeah. So what are we talking about? The saw. It really wasn't common in the Roman Empire, but it was really common during Caligula's reign. So he liked to saw them in half, including members of his own body. He liked to saw them across rather than lengthwise.
Okay, so cutting them in half.
Correct.
Top and torso.
Correct. And
Okay.
it is said that he liked to do this while he ate, stating that witnessing the suffering acted as an appetizer.
Why? What about that? What about that's exciting, Caligula?
I don't know. I mean, did you then, like, roast their entrails or something? Like, I don't know.
That's very curious. The pain, but he specifically is like the pain and the suffering of it.
The suffering acted as an appetizer. Made him hungry.
That made him hungry. I don't know.
Aw. The sack. This one's rough. It's an oddly specific form of execution.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it is only used in Rome in cases of parricide, which is killing one's parents.
Right.
Okay? The condemned was sewn into a leather sack with animals. A dog, a monkey, a snake, and a rooster.
Whoa.
Then the whole bag is tossed into the river. So if the animals didn't get you, drowning would.
Wow.
Who just has monkeys lying around to throw into a sack?
Really? This is that's insane. But then you're in the
I don't think it would last long. I think you would drown pretty quickly. But it's so specific. A dog, a monkey, a snake, and a rooster. What do you think would fuck you up more?
Yeah, I don't know. That's like
rooster?
battle royale.
The rooster or the snake?
It depends on the snake, is what I would say. The
Well,
snake
they'll probably
is
have
probably
teeth. Fangs, sorry.
right, which is gonna hurt, but it's not gonna mortally wound you. But if it's a poisonous snake, then I would say the snake is probably.
If he just keeps biting you over and over again because he's scared. I mean, these poor animals are terrified. Why are they being punished?
I don't know. I feel like as the human, you would take out the snake, you would take out the rooster, like all of those things would be easy to kill through strangulation, except for the dog.
Yeah. Dogs back then, I feel, were bigger and tougher and
Meaner.
meaner.
Yeah.
It's a Roman dog.
Mm.
And this one is definitely an exciting next edition, and this is Skinned Alive.
Oh, my favorite.
Or flaying.
Flaying.
The victim was first stripped and their hands and feet bound to stop any movement. After this, the executioner would begin peeling away the individual's skin with a very sharp blade, often starting with the extremities, as this would inflict the most suffering due to the victim still being conscious. In some instances, parts of the person's body were even boiled to make the skin softer and easier to remove.
Oh.
There were a few ways one could die from flaying: shock, blood loss, hypothermia, or infection. The time of death could also be anywhere from a few hours to a few days.
For sure. What an experience. Could you imagine, like, parts of you were boiled so they could skin your legs or something?
Oh my God.
Just your legs. Having boiled meat for legs. Dead, necrotic, boiled meat legs. Wow.
Would it hurt less to be then skinned?
I imagine.
Because wouldn't everything be dead?
Gone. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe that'd be better. Also, like, all those nerve endings and exposed... Owie. So like when they take the skin off, it's just exposed nerve, and it every time the wind blows or whatever, I mean, I'm sure it just hurts.
Sorry.
There's a cute little shudder there.
I don't know. It takes me very back to Hellraiser and the uncle smoking a cigarette in his freshly formed body, and he just doesn't have skin yet.
Right. And he's getting blood all over the filter and stuff.
I can't even imagine what that must have felt like, man.
I don't know. I think growing it wouldn't be as bad as losing it. Maybe? Who knows?
I don't know. That's a curious question.
He didn't seem to be in agony the whole time, where I would think Hypatia, a philosopher that lived in Alexandria, Egypt, around 400. So Christianity is still up and coming, and she was a Roman pagan, but she got along with pagans and Christians. So she's an advisor to this Roman prefect, who happens to be in the middle of some political intrigue with some other guy. So Hypatia is accused of preventing the two guys from making up. So one night, when she is in her carriage going home, a wild mob led by a member of the Christian community attacked her carriage. She was dragged into a church that was recently converted from a pagan temple. She was stripped naked and flayed alive with shards of pottery. They removed her eyeballs, tore her body to pieces, and dragged it out of town to burn it symbolically to purge the city of her wickedness. Because some dudes were having a fight?
Yeah. And she was like, no, you keep fighting. This is dumb. Don't
I don't even know if she did or not. She was just accused.
She was accused of it. Isn't that the way of being a woman?
Yeah.
She was accused of it. So she was flayed.
Alive, attacked on her way home.
Man, that just sounds typical.
Okay. 1571 Cyprus. The city is under siege by Ottomans. As we all remember, the Ottomans get 3 days to do whatever they want to a conquered city. So therefore, the city knew that they were about to fall, and they negotiated for terms. So the terms were anyone that wanted to could leave, and anyone that wanted to could stay for 2 years under new management and see how they liked it. The Ottomans were very understanding. They wanted to incorporate you into the empire. They wanted you to pay taxes.
That's where I was.
Yeah.
The Ottomans were super into bring you into the fold.
Yeah.
Through.
Not Romans. Yeah. It was Ottomans.
Yeah.
So those were the rules. So a whole bunch of people evacuated, right? Some stayed, but most evacuated. The lead general, Marco Antonio Bergadin. I know I'm saying that wrong. So he went to leave, and they were like, oh, hell no. You personally killed a whole bunch of our prisoners, and I think you're holding on to some munitions and some weapons. So he immediately had his ears and nose cut off and was thrown into prison, and the Turks massacred any remaining Christians that were left there. After 2 weeks of rotting in a cell and getting septic, he was tied naked to a pole and flayed alive. His body was quartered and distributed as a war trophy to the army. His skin was stuffed with straw, he was redressed in his uniform, and paraded around on a donkey through the streets.
How friggin' morbid is that? That's insane.
Yeah.
That, to me, is a little insane. Stuffed with straw, his skin stuffed with straw, and then put it in his uniform.
That's like the other guy. He was stuffed with straw and then shoved in a temple.
For reals, that's insane.
Who would want to see the sack of skin?
I don't know, but you must be very skilled at skinning to, you probably start your life in butchering of animals.
I was going to say, at this time period, everyone skins their own rabbits and, food and chickens, because they prepare their own food often, except for the really, really rich, obviously.
So a common skill. All right.
Yeah, and I wonder if
sense.
skinning a human is much different than a rabbit. Well, rabbits, don't you just, jerk and pull? I don't think you can do that with a person.
Oh, I don't know. It's the fur, that fur aspect of it.
Oh,
They
that's
have a
what
very
comes
thick
off, not their...
skin.
Well, doesn't
No,
the skin...
it's the skin
and the
it's
fur,
the
yeah.
pelt.
Yeah, because all that's left is the meat.
I feel like our epidermis is just very thin. I feel it would probably include a lot. I've never attempted or been super interested in the skinning of humans. So
These are the hard-hitting questions we look into here.
I
Histories
imagine
Uncharted.
that the skinning of fingers and hands very difficult, but that there's more sinew and meat that they could get.
Yeah. I think
So
this would be fine, delicate, and it would just
thicker.
peel off your fingers, maybe.
I mean, surgeons, I'm sure, know.
They never talk about stripping it off, always taking it off in strips.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're really morbid, sewing of that person back together.
Oh, I bet that's
that
what they did. They
experience.
probably sewed him back together.
That's insane. We'll have to stuff it, yeah.
On another note, we're going to talk about the swimming test. Those of being accused of a witch were tied up, often their hand to their big toe, then thrown into the river or deep water. If she swam to the top, the water obviously rejected her and she was guilty and immediately executed. If she drowned, she was obviously innocent and died a Christian death.
How good for her.
While there are countless examples of this was my favorite that I came across. Poor Agnes. Not going to say your last name. So she was the mistress of Albert, Duke of Bavaria. His dad did not like the fact that she was a commoner, so when Albert refused to get rid of her, his dad had her accused of being a witch and drowned in the Danube in 1435. And that's how you get rid of unwanted trash.
I guess that's how you do that. That just seems really fucked up.
But Dad, I love her. She's not good enough. So without doing anything wrong, other than the boy didn't want to give her up, she was murdered.
Very nice.
The waist chop. This is almost exclusively in China, and it involved an executioner using a very large bladed instrument to slice the wretched prisoner into two at the waist. So it was important to miss the vital organs and so cause a slow, painful death. It was not officially abolished until the 18th century. So very similar to the saw.
Yeah.
But it was
more of
like the pit and the pendulum.
Like a slow slicing. It's, the image is not a serrated blade. It looks like a very large chef knife almost.
Yeah. So it's more of like a large butcher knife.
Or a katana, a large butcher knife katana.
Swordish.
Style. It's huge.
Yeah.
So I imagine the weight of the blade. So it was very easy once you got a good glide into the groove of their spine at their waist, that you could just slowly...
Well, yeah, and it's all meat except for just the small portion of spinal column. If you get in between the vertebrae, you can right in between them.
That's intense, man. Yeah. The waist chop.
Li Si was a leading figure of early imperial China. He was a writer, a politician, and philosopher. He also got onto the wrong side of the wrong person. and he was sentenced to be executed according to the 5 pains. Okay?
The 5 pains.
5 pains. First, his nose was cut off.
Ow.
Then his foot. Then his hand. Then his doodle. He is emasculated by having his penis and testicles fully removed. Then finally, he was cut in half at the waist. Now, you would think that that would be enough, but they also had his entire extended family executed to the 3rd degree. This was in line with the ancient practice of collective prosecution.
Wow.
So it kind of helped not only keep individuals in line, but had the family help keep those people in line too, because you knew that if your nephew pissed them off and he was sentenced to get executed, you would also die, and everyone in your family would die. Right. So that's a good form of control.
And it makes sense that, I don't know, maybe if it was a sense of revenge, but it doesn't really necessarily seem like that.
You hated your uncle so much. You went and tried to kill the emperor just so he would get executed as punishment. And while you were getting the 5 pains, you're laughing. Uncle Steve, I gotcha.
I guess it's more like if, like, you slighted the emperor in a certain way, like you stole his prized concubine or whatever, you know, like something like that. If you had done something treacherous or horrible, then you would be executed, as would, you know, to the 3rd degree of your family. That makes sense to me. But, like, if you got caught stealing some dude's pig because you're poor and destitute...
I don't think it was for those. I'm sure it was the large crimes. It's a severe punishment.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess I just need some context to why you would go.
I didn't include it, but China also has, like, the death by 1,000 cuts or whatever, and it's where they tie you up in the city center and everyone gets to come and slice at you.
That's insane.
Yeah, so you do nice shallow slices, so they get more and more and more slices until you give a mercy deep slice.
It enforces a sense of community, I guess I get it, you know?
It's very Caesarist. Everyone has to
Right.
Everyone has to take a chunk.
Everyone's part of the experience of treachery.
It's a good family outing, I guess. Community outing and not just families. Right. I know that it has been a very long and enduring, arduous venture, but we are on the last one.
Whoop whoop.
And this is called the Catherine wheel. Ooh. Or the breaking wheel.
We just go wheel.
Correct.
Just a wheel.
That's why it's at the end of the alphabet for wheel, but it is known as the Catherine wheel or the breaking wheel, which would ironically put it in B's or C's.
This looks real messed up.
So this is a terrible instrument of torture. Victims were tied to the wheel and their limbs were stretched out along the spokes. The wheel would then turn so that it would break the bones within their body. So in 15th century Zurich, the condemned would be tied face down and the wheel was placed on their back and then rolled. The executioner would strike them 9 times, twice in each limb and once in the spine, before braiding their broken body through the wheel's spokes, and then you attach it to a pole, and then you just slowly die of exposure,
really messed up, man.
And shock and blood loss.
I gotta say, so Long Kiss Goodnight with Gina Davis and Samuel L. Jackson.
That was a good one.
They tie her up to a wheel and dunk her in a cold, it's like a one of those water wheels, right? And then they end up dunking her and pulling her back up and dunking her. That was very confusing to see such a hot woman being tortured.
It was
that's very confusing to be.
That's more similar to the swimming test than.
Is it? Yeah.
Yeah, than the wheel because of the dunking and the bringing back up.
The bringing back up.
Yeah.
I know the wheel is much more to harm and maim and
crush
break you
all your limbs.
Yeah. Tear you apart, etc. But man,
it conflicting.
Very
torture.
Conflicting.
Hot chick.
It's rough.
Yeah.
White t-shirt. It was
What
inappropriate.
is with white t-shirts? It just gets everyone.
It was the 90s.
It's what
And that's all
every
I'm
man
gonna
will tell
say.
you with Twister and What's Her Butt and that white tank top.
Oh, Helen Hunt?
Yeah.
I agree with you.
It
Every
just
man
gets
on that.
everyone.
Yeah. As a very straight woman, I can agree with that.
All covered in mud. Yeah. See?
She was vibes. I wanted to look like that. I wanted to be a Helen Hunt.
Khakis in a tank top, you know?
Yeah. It was, again, a very 90s Abercrombie.
Yeah, it was.
You could definitely find that. Not anything I would have fit into in the 90s.
So it's called the Catherine Wheel after Saint Catherine of Alexandria. She was the pagan Greek daughter of the governor, around 300. So she had a vision of the Virgin Mary and converted to Christianity. She then began preaching and converting others. When the emperor heard this, he said no. So he brought her to the palace to debate with leading philosophers of the day. She was so eloquent, many of the debaters converted and were immediately put to death. In his rage, the emperor said she should be broken on the wheel. But it is said that when she touched it, the wheel broke into pieces and she was beheaded. So she was turned into a martyr, and the wheel is now named after her.
She destroyed the wheel with one touch of her godly hand, and they just decided, well, I guess we'll just behead her.
I mean, quite frankly, that's destruction of, public property, government property.
I guess.
If you're going to go that route. So they just beheaded
They
her.
absolve her of one only to charge her with the crime of public property and behead her. Like, that's messed up,
And
man.
it's cool because we named the wheel after her.
That makes it okay.
Yeah.
Duh.
And, she shouldn't be converting pagans anyway.
Obviously.
Yeah.
With her eloquent, sharp tongue.
Right. Aw, poor Peter Stump. This one's a rough one. 1589, he was put on trial for being a werewolf. After being tortured and put on the rack, he finally confessed to practicing black magic since he was 12, and the devil gave him a belt that turned him into the likeness of a greedy, devouring wolf, strong and mighty, with eyes great and large, which in the night sparkled like fire, a mouth great and wide, with most sharp and cruel teeth, a huge body, and mighty paws. For 25 years, Stump had been an insatiable bloodsucker who gorged on the flesh of goats, lambs, and sheep, as well as women and children. Being threatened with torture, he confessed to the killing and eating of 14 children, 2 pregnant women, whose fetuses he ripped from their wombs and ate their hearts panting hot and raw, which he later described as dainty morsels.
Oh my God.
One of the 14 children was his son, whose brain he was reported to have devoured. Stump loved his son dearly, but in the end, his bloodlust prevailed. Allegedly, he went out with his son into the woods, transformed into the wolf, and devoured him.
Wowza. Like, I gotta say, like, how much of this is, like, super, super embellished, but how much of this could be just, like, an incredibly sick man that might have actually done these things? Or,
He confessed under torture. I think that sentence just needs to be in all caps. What would you confess to make it stop? So, not only was Stump accused of being a serial murderer and cannibal, but also of having an incestual relationship with his daughter, who was also sentenced to die with him. And he was also accused of coupling with a distant relative.
Ew. When was this again?
1589. The execution of Stump on October 31st, 1589, alongside his daughter, Sybil, and his mistress, Catherine, is one of the most brutal on record. He was put to the wheel, where flesh was torn from his body in 10 places with red-hot pincers, followed by his arms and his legs. Then his limbs were broken with the blunt side of an axe before he was beheaded and his body burned on a pyre. His daughter and mistress had already been flayed and strangled and were burned along with Stump's body. As a warning against similar behavior, local authorities created a pole with the torture wheel and the figure of a wolf on it, and at the very top, they placed his head.
I mean, like, are everyday people just going to be like that, just eating babies? I don't think so. Like,
that's what we said last time. Like, who wants to eat these babies? Why is that keep being, like, something that we have to confess? Was this big of a deal? People were terrified that everyone was eating everybody's babies?
For reals. It just seems fantastical.
Yeah, it does.
It just seems fantastical.
You know what? Out of everything, you know what I'd eat least? A baby. Do you have meat on it?
No.
What's that? It's like a snack. Okay, everyone, we are now coming up to our very last example, and I wanted to tie this person in. We're just going to call him Jean-Baptiste because there's no way I'm saying that. He is the only person to be broken on the wheel in America. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it was like a one-time occurrence?
So in the 1750s, he was imprisoned in the French prison on modern-day Cat Island in Mississippi for charges of illegally salvaging wrecked ships. So he didn't even, like, kill people or eat babies. He salvaged probably gold and stuff from wrecked ships off of the coast, the eastern coast of America.
Okay.
In 1757, soldiers stationed at the prison staged a mutiny and killed the commanding officer. They took Jean-Baptiste hostage, and they forced him to be their guide as they went into the hinterlands away from the colonies. Okay? The mutineers even provided Jean-Baptiste with a signed certificate saying that he had not been party to the mutiny. Okay? So he's a shipwrecker, salvager. He gets put in jail. There is a mutiny in the jail.
Mm-hmm.
They kidnap him, use him as a tour guide, and even say, here's a piece of paper saying you really had nothing to do with this.
Right.
Okay? You were just an innocent bystander.
We made you do it.
Despite this, the governor had him court-martialed and he was sentenced to death. He was executed by the breaking wheel in front of a church in New Orleans, Louisiana on June 7th, 1957. The French authorities mutilated what were left of his remains and deposited them in the Mississippi River.
It's just messed up, man.
Yeah, he didn't even really do anything. Took some gold, got kidnapped, helped some people.
But obviously, we gotta make an example of you damn do-gooder.
You know, it doesn't really say what happened to the mutineers, so
Yeah.
we'll see what happened to them.
I don't know.
And on that lovely note, for the 3 listeners that have made it to the end of this extremely long, morbid saga, thank you so much for listening to our Tales of Execution. Feel free to just do some simple Google searches for these images. It's just what I did. And as always, we're super excited that you were listening to our spooky Halloween series. We have just a couple more episodes left in it to get us through the month of October. And then we get to go into November.
Absolutely. And I hope you guys all sleep tonight. 'Cause I don't know if I am.
Or maybe you won't have the most restful dreams. So
Have a good night, everybody. Hey everyone, we just wanted to take a minute and thank you for listening to us here at Histories Uncharted. We know you have lots of options out there, and we are super grateful you chose to share this hour with us. As a brand new podcast, it takes a lot to get started in the beginning, so if you could please rate us, follow us, leave a comment, or even share our podcast with someone you think would love to hear a cool story. You can do one or all 3, but whatever you do, we would love to hear from you.